And I just want to welcome all of you to this eSeminar. One of the reasons NYSAIS calls these eSeminars is we limit the number of people who can be in the meeting with us. And now I'm in New York City, so you may hear sirens around me a little bit. So I apologize in advance for that. But we want to have eSeminars where they really become interactive. We prefer this to the webinar format because we want people to talk. And so this is going to be a conversation, hopefully more of a conversation and less of it just me talking at you. So I'm hoping that this feels something like a classroom or a face-to-face meeting we might have. And then I've had with several of you actually at your schools in the past. So okay, great. Well, it's really nice to have everybody in our meeting today in this eSeminar. I'm going to switch over and share my screen so you can see what I'm going to talk about a little bit. And then we will, and you'll all go into kind of a gallery mode on the right-hand side of your screen, but you can adjust that, by the way, if you want to and see something different.
One thing I'll mention while Mark does this, you'll probably, the default is to see 4 images, 4 thumbnails over on the right. You can adjust that to just see one active speaker thumbnail, which will be Mark. So if you click on that small button over on the right, the white button, you'll see just Mark appearing in the upper right-hand corner in addition to his slides.
And you can also move that around any place you want with your mouse. So let's start with just the very beginning, and we're going to really talk about effective governance practices and accreditation and how we do that in a changing environment. And I basically have 3 major goals for us for this evening. One is just to use accreditation to improve governance. How do we do that? What's the process and how does that work? The next one is to use Dazzle to understand trends and what I would call trends and blips. And I think it's important for us to understand the difference between trends and blips. Then the next goal is to use a board self-assessment. How do you do that? And what are the best practices? And again, this is going to be a conversation, so you can stop me at any point and ask questions. Feel free to do that. You just have to unmute your microphone. So I always like to start all of my workshops on governance with this quote from Peter Drucker. And basically what Peter's talking about is the role of the board, that it is never about power in a nonprofit organization. I don't think it should be about power in any organization, but certainly nonprofits. It's really about responsibility to the organization, to the entire board as a board, to the staff, as well as to the mission. And I think the key areas here that Peter really emphasizes are the issue of responsibility, as well as fidelity to the mission of the school. So a lot of people ask, well, why would a school even go through accreditation? So I'm going to just identify basically 3 things that we go through accreditation for that we think are important for accreditation. One is what we would call self-reflection. And this is where you get the chance to look at your school through the lens of your unique mission. So Kellenberg is not going to be compared with Ideal. And Ideal is not going to be compared with Poughkeepsie Day. Kellenberg will be compared against Kellenberg's mission. Poughkeepsie Day will be compared against Poughkeepsie Day's mission. So what is your mission? What is your culture? This idea of really introspective self-reflection. The next area is accountability. And that's where we really want to apply a unified set of standards of excellence for the schools. So NYSAIS has developed a whole series of criteria in several chapters, ranging from mission and culture to governance to finance to program to community. And we have these standards of excellence that we would call criteria. We believe that an important aspect of accreditation is creating stability in the areas of governance as well as finance. Those are really important roles for the trustees to be paying a lot of attention to. How do you work as a board, and how does your school operate on a financial level? The last area of why schools might seek accreditation is school improvement. It's all about how do you make, what do you look like now? What are you going to look like 5 years from now? Perhaps what are you going to look like 10 years from now? How do you continue to improve? I like to use the term continuous improvement. The thing about accreditation is sometimes we see it from, it happens every 5 years, a large one every 10 years, and then a smaller one in the 5-year level. But continuous improvement should happen ongoing on an annual basis, on a regular basis. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So NYSAIS starts off with a definition of a board of trustees, and we're going to talk about that. And I'd like you to go ahead and read this definition, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts about what are some of the big points in this that you think are important in this definition. So go ahead and read it. So tell me some of the things that maybe resonate with some of you on this definition. And you can just unmute your microphone and go ahead and talk. In fact, I'm going to stop the share for just a second so we can see each other. Thoughts? What are some of the key elements out of that definition?
Mark, can you put it back up again?
I sure can, Ben. Let me pull it up. There you go.
Mark, I'm willing to go first since I saw this last night.
Thank you.
Get it started. Sorry, I feel like I should step up. But the two things that I think really jump out for me are, you know, being responsible for the sustainability of the school and our involvement in all aspects of fundraising and financial planning and always thinking about the future. And the other piece is staying out of the hair of the administrators and letting them run the school day to day.
Okay. Two really good points. What else? What is it, let me try this. What does it mean when we're talking about a deliberative group? What does that mean to you?
Joe from Corliers. I was going to say that the clearly defined roles, it seems very important so that you understand both as a trustee and as a board exactly what it is that you're trying to do and what the responsibilities are.
Okay, very good. What else?
Decisions aren't made in a vacuum. It's made by deliberation and consensus.
Yes, decisions are not made in a vacuum. They're made by deliberation and consensus. So the value of the trustees is the different perspectives that the trustees bring to this conversation, which are really important. So it's this deliberative group, clearly defined roles, everybody understands what they're doing, and it is about fidelity to the mission, as well as the fiduciary responsibility. So NYSAIS gives guidance in a number of ways as far as you as boards of trustees and in the governance section of accreditation. And one of the areas that we give is through our manual for evaluation and accreditation. And I've used 4.0. Some of you have done accreditations in the past, and maybe you did our 3.5. 4.0 is the new manual that'll be going out, and it's for the schools that are doing accreditations, I believe, starting next year. Governance is a key part of evaluating individual schools. We believe that when governance is done well and the trustees have done it well, and they're working well with the administration, the school's probably running extremely well. So in the governance section, there are basically 5 baseline criteria, and there's 14 what we would call strategic criteria for governance. So we're going to spend a little bit of time fleshing them out just a little bit. So this is a baseline. This is the very first baseline, and this is the governing body ensures administrative follow-up as a result of an outside annual professional audit and the corresponding management letter. So I really want to ask, I know that all of you, because you have schools in the state of New York, it's required under the law to do an audit. What is the purpose of the management letter itself? Why would we think that that's important for trustees to be paying attention to with the management letter?
The management letter is going to give the nuances of what's going on beyond the simple numbers.
Okay, so it's giving the nuances. What else?
It's often giving you points where you can improve or better align with best practices.
Points where you can align with best practices. Anything else? The other piece that it gives you is it gives you more confidence as trustees in the internal controls. That you have an understanding that the internal controls are being looked at by an outside group. So for instance, if you're a small school, how does the segregation of duties work out? How are funds being handled? Who's doing the intake of funds? Who's doing the expenditure of funds? Because as a trustee, you want to be confident because you do have a fiduciary responsibility. You want to be confident that the internal controls of the organization are good and that they're being well taken care of, and that you don't find out that something's happening that's inappropriate with the funds of the school. That rests with the trustees to make sure that's happening. So that's why NYSAIS, the law is the professional audit. The additional piece that NYSAIS adds is the corresponding management letter. We believe that another baseline is that you should maintain appropriate bylaws that conform to all legal requirements. You're assuring that the school and governing body operate in compliance with applicable laws and regulations. That's a big task on the part of the board. It's not something that you do as an individual, but you need to make sure that you are very comfortable that the school is following local transportation laws, local fire code laws, local employment laws, state laws, as well as any federal laws. The conflict of interest policy is one that's important. I think every NYSAIS school that I know of does this. They have to do this. It's a requirement. Again, this is a baseline criteria. What is the point of the conflict of interest policy from your perspectives? Hop in.
That you're that you're making decisions that are in the best interest of the school and not for personal gain.
And does that's Alex, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Alex, can board members have conflicts of interest?
If yes, but they'd have to disclose them.
And that's exactly right. Board members can have conflict of interest. They have to fully disclose it, and then it has to be action needs to be taken on that by the entire board or the executive committee of the board, and that needs to be documented. So you can have conflicts of interest because sometimes it's inevitable that good trustees will have a conflict of interest, but it's important that everybody understands them and that they are accounted for. Full and accurate record of your meetings, committees, and policies. I know that boards are very good at keeping board meeting minutes. Sometimes boards are not quite as good at keeping minutes for committee meetings. It's important that there are meetings, meeting minutes for committees. We highly recommend that. They don't have to be terribly detailed, but again, if you could look at it this way, that as board members, you are really the keepers of the flame. And so you want to make sure that not only you understand what happened in that committee meeting or in the board meeting, but future trustees. That's one of the points of minutes. That's some group in the future, 10 years, 15 years, when you're well gone from being a trustee, that they can go back and look and say, this is what happened at that point in time. So this one here, if I'm going to give you one takeaway for this evening, it's this one, baseline 3.5. The governing body ensures the confidentiality of all conversations. So why is that important for a governing body to ensure the confidentiality of all conversations? Why is that important? Unmute your microphone so we can hear your thoughts about that. I'd say that this is a really important topic for trustees.
Well, one thing, Mark, I think that we know that there are a lot of really, really important and sensitive issues that are discussed. And when the board is deliberating, they need to feel free to throw it all out there and discuss it. And you want to make sure what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Okay. So you want to make sure that people feel comfortable in conversation. What else?
Also, So the board can speak as one voice once the decision is made, probably.
The board speaks as one voice. And what happens if a board member violates the whole issue of confidentiality? What can happen to the board itself?
I would think the credibility of the board would take a hit for sure. And then if you tried to piece it together again and put out an actual agenda that you were going to be on the level, I think that becomes difficult to kind of rally everybody back into that belief and that truth that you are indeed credible in what you're carrying out.
Okay, so the credibility of the board itself.
Right.
And it can become fractured.
It can become fractured. Why would that happen? Alex, go ahead.
You know, I think that it, you know, with some of the topics that are, you know, very sensitive, when you have differing opinions, the board, you know, votes and, you know, consensus needs to rule. And so you can't build two different camps. It just doesn't work that, it won't work.
Okay. Those are all really good reasons to make sure that all board members are adhering to that. It makes a really good board when that happens, and it makes a very dysfunctional board when it doesn't happen. So the next one is the roles and responsibilities of the governing body are clearly defined. They're transparent and they're communicated by to all constituents. Think about your own board. How is that happening? Is that happening? Are the roles and responsibilities of the governing body really clear? Everybody understands what everybody does. Are they well defined? Are they transparent so everybody knows? And how are they communicated out to constituencies? There's oftentimes people have really misunderstandings about the role of the board versus the role of the administration. And it's important for board members in this governance section to really spend time thinking about how do they communicate out what board members do. That the decisions of the governing body are effectively communicated to the appropriate constituents. I'm not going to spend much time on that one. Members of the governing body recognize and fulfill their responsibilities. Again, the emphasis in our accreditation and in NYSAIS accreditation is the issue that the governing body are the stewards of the mission of the school. That the governing body is really the only group that's responsible for strategic planning and at least getting initiated is the governing body. So again, that's your role. This one is a really important one, which is the stability and transitions of leadership for both itself, the board, as well as the head of school. When we in NYSAIS have seen schools that have this one right, the schools are usually running very, very well. The board is running very well. The transitions for the president of the board are smooth. The transitions for the leadership of the board are smooth. And the same thing is true when they have administration. When there's a new head, that transition is smooth. When schools get off the rails, it's because some things happen in transitions. Maybe the board has become dysfunctional and it's sort of chaotic, or the same thing has happened maybe on the transition of the leadership of the school itself. This is a really important criteria for schools to get right. And I would suggest to all schools that spend time, and governing bodies spend time paying attention to this one. The governing body ensures that the head of school receives appropriate support, evaluation, and compensation. Very important that you're giving feedback to the head of school. And again, that the financial resources are being provided to the school for the types of programs that the school is trying to do. This one is really an important one. The governing body has appropriate policies to support the creation, review, and approval of an annual operating budget. Every board does that. We know that. But this next part is something that we see that sometimes is missing, which is this multi-year financial plan. Again, when we've seen schools that get upside down financially or are doing really well financially, it's because they're projecting out really nicely out into the future. If you are a school that is driven a lot by tuitions, this is one you should really be paying attention to, because the multi-year plan should be continuously updated. If you assumed 300 students and you ended up with 275, that's a problem. If you ended up with 275 over 3 or 4 years, that is a trend. And you need to make sure you've adjusted appropriately before that becomes a big problem. The governing body is really the group that's responsible for advancement, which is development efforts, and they actively support that. And the governing body is responsible for the broad policies, and they delegate the operations to the head of school. That's an important concept in a NYSAIS school or any nonprofit school, that the board sets policy, the administration is responsible for the operations. That the governing body really is focused on the strategic interests, and that's where I think the value of trustees comes to the school, is that they become strategic, they're thinking strategically. And this is one that I think sometimes governing bodies do and then don't do, and do and don't do. And then we think that you should be consistently doing this, which is a really good program of professional development for the governing body itself. That the board has a really good orientation for new trustees. There's ongoing education about governance and best practices. There is a self-evaluation of the board itself and a self-evaluation of individual board members. And again, like in S3.15, or the one on transitions, that there is a leadership succession plan. The governing body, we believe, should also make sure that issues of gender, diversity, multiculturalism, they're appropriately considered during policymaking and governing body membership. That the governing body, in essence, should reflect the community that's trying to serve as best that it can. This is one that is sometimes slipped up, not paid attention to quite as much as governing bodies should, and that is the issue of risk assessment and management, that the school has adequate insurances. So as a board member, some of you are board members, do you know how much D&O insurances the school has? What type of liabilities does it cover? What are your other liability insurances that you have? What do they cover? There was a case a couple of years ago. It's still an ongoing legal case. It's Hotchkiss School in Connecticut. They had a group of students who went overseas. A child contracted an illness while overseas. It caused a debilitating injury to her. I think seriously debilitating injury. The family sued the school. It went to court. The judgment against the school was $41 million, which is a huge amount of money. It is on appeal right now, but it's something that has caused every school to pay attention to. Do you have adequate risk assessment insurances in place? Boards are responsible for this, so make sure that you've paid attention to that. Does anybody have any questions about these criteria? Thoughts about them? They make sense to you?
Mark, I have a specific question.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
We did speak with George about, but and maybe it's our school is so different. Principal president model, and we don't have a board of directors. We have a staff that reports to the principal. So
right, but you do have somebody who the principal reports to. Somebody hired the principal. No? Chris, you froze up, and I think you're on, you might be on a wireless or something. So maybe we can talk about your specific issue, because I know Kellenberg has a slightly different governance model, but we could talk about that. But bottom line,
that'd be great.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
No problem. Bottom line for every school is there is somebody who hires or brings in whoever is the leader, and that's the way we look at that. So it might not be called a board of trustees, but it's somebody, that is made the hire of the person who's the executive. So I want to move to one of the new additions to our accreditation, and that is what we call the verification statement. This is something that boards need to be aware of, that this is an expectation of NYSAIS accreditation, and this covers all the compliance issues. So NYSAIS does not put out on a visiting team people who go through all your documents. A NYSAIS accreditation, just so you get a sense for our accreditation, is not, we value aspirations as much as or more than compliance. Compliance is an important issue. It's your fiduciary responsibility, but we believe that the group that's responsible for the fiduciary and the compliance piece is the board and the administration. So as a result, we have what we call the verification statement, which basically is signed by the board chair, as well as the head of school, stating that they are in full compliance with all laws and regulations. And we've given you some examples of them. The Nonprofit Revitalization Act, the Board of Regents has some requirements, as well as child abuse reporting requirements. NYSAIS can give you the links to there is an entire manual for non-public schools in the state of New York that's put out by the State Education Department. If you need the link, you can just send Judy or George or me, any of us, and we'll send you the link. Then you can go right to the manual and see what's in that manual. It's very detailed about what some of the requirements are for non-public schools in New York. So I want to spend just a few minutes talking about using data, because we believe that one of the values of accreditation, and this is something that NYSAIS has been piloting with the National Association of Independent Schools. So even if your school is not a member of the NAIS, you're still required as part of your membership in NYSAIS to put in information into what's called Dazzle. And in Dazzle, if you are not a member of NAIS, you still will get all the data from all the New York schools. You do not have to be a member of NAIS to do that. You just have to be a member of NYSAIS. If you are a member of NAIS, you get all the data from the entire country. We believe that this is an important tool for you as a school to monitor trends. We highly recommend that administrators as well as boards of trustees spend time monitoring trends, tracking them, what's going on over time. So this is an example we've put up of here of a school, and you can see the various trends. And now this looks like, to me, a very stable school. If you look at the class size and teaching load, the class sizes are staying pretty stable over time. And so this is one trend that you might watch, is class size. I'm going to give you some other trends that you can get through Dazzle. One is it's just student enrollment. Again, you should be monitoring your student enrollment, looking at that. Is it a trend, or is it a blip? And again, that's an important distinction. Student attrition data. We often hear about, well, we've had 10 students leave this year. Well, is that a lot? Is that not very many at all, depending on your school, depending on your history of the school. NAIS actually did a study several years ago and classified schools into 3 categories in attrition: what they would call the low attrition schools, the medium attrition schools, and the high attrition schools. Where does your school fall? So it's important to look at that data over time. That's a very useful tool to understand what trends are happening at your school. I think that schools should be keeping these for 10, 15 years, 20 years, and really looking at the overall trends. It really gives you, as decision makers in your schools, it gives you really powerful information. Another area are just salaries. So what are your salary trends? Are they sustainable? If you project that out 10 years, what does that mean? Often we only think in terms of 1 year out or 2 years out, but it really is a good idea to be tracking your data out over time. And then the last one is class size. Now you can get other information through Dazzle, lots of other areas, but these are ones that we require as part of the accreditation process. These are simple reports that are available to you. So we think it's important that you're tracking data over a period of time to understand your trends. Is it a trend, or is it a blip? What are some of the other things, just out of curiosity, that you feel are important trends that you are tracking or should be tracking at your school? What are you tracking?
Teacher attrition?
Teacher attrition, that's a great one, isn't it? Yeah. What else?
For our school, it would be gender of students. We tend to be boy heavy.
Ah, okay, so gender of students. And again, the more you can keep those, and the longer you make sure that you have this trend data over time, it gives you really powerful data. What else? What other trends do you track?
Giving information, participation rates.
Yeah, Alex, that's really a great one. And annual giving rates are really a good, what we would call a leading indicator. So it's a good substitute for sort of the feeling at the school, what's happening with the annual giving. It's a really nice trend to be tracking, not just on the financial side, but it's also a good proxy for how people are kind of feeling about the school because it's beyond beyond tuition. What else?
Financial aid.
Financial aid is a really important trend to Annette to track.
Yeah.
What is your trend looking like? And the point of this for you is not only to understand what does it look like right now, what does it look like historically, and then project that thing out 4, 5, 6 years, and what does that mean? And that helps you as boards in making really, really good decisions. Any other good trends? I love hearing these trends.
One thing that we're doing at Kellenberg, we just started, is to keep track of what district they come from. Not that we haven't in the past, but to keep track of really the neighborhoods, because we probably pull from about 60 different school districts.
Okay.
And we like to pull from,
good.
we're specifically concerned about the most socioeconomically disadvantaged, to make sure that that they have the opportunity to come to Kellenberg. So
Sure.
that's one area that we've been starting to look at.
So one way to, and I think it's a great one, Chris, one way to look at your trends also. So I've been focusing in on the internal changes, but the other way to look at your trends is to look at your comparison schools. So what schools do you compare your school with? And what's happening, through Dazzle, I believe you need 5 comparison schools. Is that right in that, George and Andrea? It's a 5, yeah. So you need 5 comparison schools to create a comparison group. One of the things, we had a really nice conversation when I was at Spire Legacy last night, and I think Jennifer, maybe you brought it up, somebody brought up that, does it have to always be the same comparison group for each of the different trends? And the answer is no, that you may be tracking salaries in one way with one set of schools, but you may be tracking something else, tuitions or attrition, in another way of some sort.
Yeah,
so, yeah, go ahead,
I was just going to say what was very interesting, because it was because we were following trends that we determined that even though we're a K through 8 school, and we're often looking at other K through 8 schools for things like tuition and enrollment and things like that, that if we look at when we're competing for students, what are the schools that they choose instead of Spire, they're almost all K through 12 schools that were not, for admissions purposes at least, seem to be competing as much with the K through 8. So it was just an interesting thing that popped up, and it means that we look at different schools for different purposes.
Yeah, and I think that this is a really good way of looking at comparison data when you're creating comparison schools, that don't just say, well, it's just these 5 schools and we compare everything on all those 5. Don't do that. You can change that up if you want to. But the point is, once you have a comparison group, stay with it for a period of time and keep tracking it. So you may be looking at, now your salary data is looking like this, but what's the comparison schools looking like? How does that, are you more than them? Are you less than them? Tracking that kind of information is really a critical piece. Any other comments or questions about these? Are really great things that everybody's sharing.
Mark, I'm just starting to our Dazzle information. And a question I'll have then is, how do I know what our comparison schools are paying their teachers?
That's available through Dazzle. You can find out the comparison of salaries. You can't go to an individual school and look at their salary, but you can create a comparison group of 5, and then they will give you the salaries through Dazzle.
I see. Okay, I understand.
And those of you that are trustees, I really recommend that you spend time figuring out what we would call your dashboards. What are the things that you're looking at that you need to be paying attention to? And most of that information, particularly numbers information, in every one of these areas, I don't know how many data points are on Dazzle, but there's probably a couple hundred that you can track. So that's important for trustees to think about. What are the things we really need to pay attention to here? So I'm going to move us on, and I'm going to talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about assessing the board. And I'm going to close up with that, actually. So let's talk a little bit about using a board self-assessment. What I'd like to hear from you. So this is a sample that I'm just going to put up here so you can see it. This is a sample of the NYSAIS Evaluation Accreditation Board of Trustees self-assessment. And this is where a governing body will will evaluate itself as an entire group, and then each person evaluates themselves as an individual on the board. What are their contributions on the board? Why is it important for a board to do a self-assessment for the board itself as well as for individual board members? We tell you to do it, and I know you do it when we require it as part of the accreditation, but beyond that, why is that important?
Because you don't know you're getting better.
You don't know if you're getting better.
It really is just a self-reflection. It's a time to reflect as a whole group and revisit your goals, and are you accomplishing them?
So get to know yourself, improve yourself, look at your goals. So tell me about how often or what types of assessments each of your boards do of themselves. Can we hear about that? Just share it.
We use the NAIS one.
And NAIS is a really good resource for that. They have a great evaluation tool, excellent tool. Okay, what else? Other tools that you're using? Yeah, go ahead, Joe and Mary, I see you.
We do an annual self-evaluation, although we are revamping ours. Ours is sort of a version that came from NAIS that we've changed a little bit. But we were feeling that some of the questions, that's why we're sort of reviewing it actually, is that some of the questions are a little repetitive, and we're kind of doing an assessment of in answering some of the questions, what is it telling us, and is it telling us anything in particular? Because sometimes I think it becomes a bit of busy work, and we want it to be a really important part of the work we do, because we do get a great response rate on ours.
And Joe, are you going to develop your own? Is that what I'm hearing you sort of?
We've collected a few, so ISM and a few others that we found through other not-for-profit. So we've sort of branched out into broader not-for-profit self-evaluations, and we're doing a comparison between them, and just kind of seeing where there are differences, and you know what we think are the priorities for us. Because sometimes we found that often we were getting an I don't know response or a neutral. So we've really highlighted those questions that we've been getting that kind of neutral or I don't know response to, and are evaluating those questions specifically to see either is it the way the question's asked, or is this just sort of a less meaningful question, or is it that trustees really don't have enough information to answer a question?
You know what I really like about what you're saying, Joe, is that you're Joe, right?
Yes.
I assume because you wrote it out that way, that's left to right. So what I really like about this, Joe, is that your board is really thinking through the tool that they're going to use, that you are using, and you're thinking about this tool in a way that is this really giving us good information? And the place that's not giving us good information, we want to adjust. I really like that a lot, and it shows that you're really thoughtful in the way you're approaching best practices with the board itself, because who else is going to make the board better unless it's the board itself?
Yeah, no, we see it as a valuable tool, and I think, you know, governance really is always looking to kind of what can we do better, and you know, where is something serving us well, or how could we make adjustments to get better information.
Who on your board takes care of that and oversees that? Is it a committee or what is it?
It's the governance committee. I mean, all of us are working together on that.
Yeah.
So that's assigned to the governance committee of your board?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Could we hear some of the other practices? I'm really curious about this one.
So Mark, we've been using your tool for about the last 4 years, and we have a similar, it's not called a governance committee, but a committee on trustees that has struggled a bit with what to do with the data that we have, and sort of how to use it to address things like the level of engagement, say, of some of our outside board members and things like that. Like, what should we be using it for at the end of the day?
Great. And you have a committee like the governance committee that takes care of this and looks at it.
Yes, yeah.
Good. What else? What are some of the other practices out there? We've got a lot of schools here tonight. Ideal.
Mark, we have, we do an annual self-evaluation as well, but we face the same Aspire, certain response and how to deal with those board members who are sort of the outside board members who are not as involved. So we're looking at that and trying to decide how to present the information that we get. And well, number one, how to get more of a response, and then how to present that information so it's more helpful.
Do any of you, that's fantastic. You know, do any of you have developed completely your own tool for this? Anybody's done that? Something to think about, that perhaps one way for boards to do this would be to take the NYSAIS tool and take the NAS tool and the ISM tool and custom tailor it for yourselves. It's sort of like where Corlear sounds like you're going actually with this, which I think is a really nice idea, because then it becomes really what do you really want to know that's, you know, about your board itself. So I've covered tonight, I think, most of the categories that we wanted to talk about. This is a good time now. I think we have a few minutes left. I think we have about 5-10 minutes left max to do some questions and answers and just talking about anything with accreditation or governance, whatever you'd like to talk about. I'm happy to have that conversation.
So,
Hello, Mark?
Yeah, go ahead, Angela. Why don't you go, and then Joe, you can go next.
Okay, thank you. Is there a formula or guidelines from NYSAIS in terms of the number of board members you should have? Is it based on student enrollment? Could you speak to that? And also similarly, can you also speak to how do you know, or how do you ascertain the amount of D&O coverage and other insurance coverages you should have?
So Angela,
I'm just doing a pulse check for us to see if in fact we are in line.
yeah, so let's go around the room and just talk about, first of all, the size of your board. So just the legal side, you need to have 5. And so you should have a minimum of 5. That's way too small for a board. We typically see boards anywhere 12, 15, 16, sometimes 20. Occasionally we've seen some boards that are bigger than that. I think it depends on the size of the school, the purpose of the board, and the ability to attract board members. If it gets too big, it becomes unwieldy. If it's too small, it's actually hard to attract people to the board, because everybody sees the board working so darn hard that they don't want to join the board because there's just too much. So you need to have the right size. But let's go around, and I'd like to hear the sizes of your boards actually. So I'll just call you. So Jennifer, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Joe, and then we'll go to Alex and Janet.
So I think as you know, last night we added 2 board members. I think we're up to about 15. Now we had some people who had been on the board for a very long time, who had finished 3 terms, went off last year. So we're in a building phase right now, but I think we're at 15. And my goal is to get us to about 18 because of the committee structure and needing enough working members of all of our committees.
Okay, good. Joe, what about you?
We're 19, and similar to Spare, we find that 18 to 20 is a sweet number because it gives enough trustees for the committees to staff committees. Any less, and it's a little stretching on the committee side, and more, I think it just becomes a big boardroom.
Alex and Janet?
We have 17, and our bylaws allow 5 to 21.
Okay. 17.
I'm
go ahead.
I'm fairly new, so I think we have 21. The bylaws call for 24.
Okay. So I think that gives you, does that give you kind of a good sense, Angela, of sort of the range? And then the other one that you asked about was D&O insurance. And I think that part of that is a assessment of your risks that you have going on at the school. So what type of programs are you offering? So for instance, do you have a lot of students that are going overseas? Are they doing a lot of travel? Are they on public transportation a lot as far as things with the school? What type of sports do you have going on? Those kinds of things need to be discussed on an annual basis with a broker. And what are the possibilities out there? A big one that we're starting to see, and NYSAIS has been working with our brokers about this, which is the whole issue of cyberbullying. And that's an emerging area of insurances. In the past, the policies have not been particularly good about that, but there's some new products that are out there. It's becoming an area that schools are getting into litigation over. So I would suggest that, again, a really thorough discussion with your broker about what it is that you're doing, how it is that you're doing, and assessing what are the possible risks there. If you're sending kids all over the world and you also have a football team and all those things, then probably you want a fair amount of insurance. Okay.
Also, Mark, the annual broker meeting that's usually held with CFO, I think is a good idea maybe to present to the board, maybe a synopsis of it, and they can hear it directly from the benefits administrators who are really directing you.
I think it's a great idea. So what we do at NYSAIS is just, you know, because we also, like you, are a 501c3 organization. Our broker comes into our finance committee meeting once a year and walks through the finance committee, all the insurances that we carry ourselves as an association. So it's a really good practice to do that and to update, keep your board informed about what are your insurances.